If you are sick and tired of your opponent copying your every move in the opening and getting boring positions like the one you see in front of you, then you have come to the right place. Because in this video, I'm going to show you how to put an end to these copycats. We're going to start off with pawn to e4. They respond to e5, copying our every move. We go bishop to c4, bishop to c5 is played, knight to c3, knight to c6. As you can see, they're happily following our every step. But here's where we deviate. We play a move that the copycat cannot follow, and that is queen to g4. Of course, if they really want to stay true, then they can play queen to g5 and give you the free queen. There's your free win, video ended, that's how you beat the copycat. I'm just kidding, your opponents, once they reach this position, are most likely going to play one of three moves, and I'm going to give them in order of most likely, and those moves are queen to f6, pawn to g6, and king to f8. King f8 is the best move, but is the hardest to see, and I've got some very nasty traps for you after queen to f6 and pawn to g6. Let's take a look at them. Queen to f6 is the most common move, and it's actually a blunder. It looks so natural. It makes an attack on our f2 pawn, which looks like we have to address it. Except we don't. We ignore the threat and play knight to d5, a brilliant move, seemingly giving away the f2 pawn for free. Black is also overworked, as the c7 pawn is under threat, as well as the g7 pawn, and if the queen moves back to d8, then we will just take the g7 pawn and win the game. So really, black's hand is forced. They must play queen takes on f2. And after king to d1, our guardian angel, this bishop here on c4, is guarding the f1 square and preventing a checkmate. Be very careful in this opening. While it is good for white objectively, there are a couple of spots where you can trip up, but if you know what you're doing, you should be able to win almost all the time. In this opening, let me tell you, I have an 80% plus win rate. Some of the most common moves here, especially at the lower level, is stuff like knight to f6, but I've got a winning line for you already. And it starts with queen takes on g7. This is the move that you're going to play 99% of the time. You're able to play queen takes on g7 on every single move that black goes for where they don't defend the g7 pawn, which is every move other than king to f8 or bishop to f8. Bishop to f8 doesn't make any sense though, because you just run into a fork. So we're looking at knight to f6, which, as I just told you, should be met with queen takes on g7. If black tries to save the rook, then we have knight takes on f6. We've taken a piece with check, and we should be able to win pretty easily. Just as an example, if the king moves away, then we can just play something like knight to f3, and we are completely winning. So black has to try something, and goes for knight takes on d5. But we've got it all under control. We can take a rook with check, force bishop to f8. Now we take with the pawn, very important. Don't take with the bishop, that would hang a mate in one. So we take with the pawn. If they move the knight into the center, then we can just play queen takes on e5 and win. And if they try the best move, queen takes on g2, then we can take the knight, they take our rook, we can take the pawn with check, and after they block, we just retreat with queen to g3 and have a significant material advantage and have successfully punished the copycat with an extra piece. I mentioned that king to f8 is the best move that black can try here, but that doesn't mean we're going to let up on the pressure, because knight to h3 comes with an immediate attack on the queen, and after the most natural move being played, which is queen to d4, getting the queen to a safe square, white is actually winning here with the super calm and collected move pawn to d3, which has a devious threat behind it. And that is pawn to c3 with a trap on the queen quite literally in the center of the board. If black is not careful and plays something like d6 trying to counterattack our queen, then we can just retreat something like queen to g3. If they try to take the knight here, then we even have the stunning move rook to f1. Ignoring the bishop and saying your queen is not leaving to f2, my friend. It is completely buried, and I'm playing pawn to c3 basically no matter what. If they retreat the bishop back, pawn to c3, the queen has no escape. Let's say they take the knight, we take the queen, they take the bishop, we take their bishop, and it's a completely winning position. If black tries something like knight to f6, then we can simply capture the knight after pawn captures. We have bishop to h6 check, and after the king moves to the side, even queen to g7 once again. The black pieces are so far away, the rook is undefended, and if you try and save the rook with something like rook to e8, then yes, we do have queen takes on f7, but remember, always look for better. We have pawn to c3, and in between move, the queen moves back, and even knight to g5. Absolutely brutal. Chess.com gives it a double exclamation mark. If you capture the knight, bishop takes, queen to f6, queen takes on f6, king to f8, and queen takes f7 is a mate. But these are just some sample lines here. Essentially, all you need to know is pawn to c3 with the idea of trapping the queen, rook to f1 is often strong lining up with the king, and the queen is always putting pressure on the g7 pawn. If you can remember all of these themes, then you're going to win the position 99 times out of 100. But if you thought we'd had our fun with queen to f6, just wait till you see what I have for you on pawn to g6, which is the next most common move that black can try. We see it right here. Pawn to g6 stops our threat on g7, but we can drop back with queen to f3, now creating a renewed threat on the f7 pawn. Black's most logical way to defend against that is knight to f6, thinking they're getting two birds with one stone, developing the knight and also looking to castle. But already in this position, due to the dark squared weaknesses, black is in a little bit of trouble. I mean, only need a couple moves, like pawn to d3 here and bishop to g5 before black can get in some serious trouble. But we can't play that right away because black is threatening knight to d4, which is a bit annoying. So remember, in these positions, we're always going to meet knight to d4 with knight to e2, stopping the knight from going there. And after pawn to d6, once again, we can't really play pawn to d3 that well because then black might play bishop to g4. So we're going to play the preventative move pawn to h3, stopping bishop to g4. And after bishop to e6, black is trying to trade off the bishops here to relieve a little bit of pressure. But once again, this move, pawn to d3, this devious little pawn returns, setting the trap. After pawn to d3, many players are inclined to take the bishop and say, I'm damaging the structure and trading off one of white's strongest pieces. But bishop takes on c4 is actually a huge blunder, and I've had so many people play it against me, especially in the quicker time controls, and that's because it allows bishop to g5, the move that I was mentioning earlier. We ignore the bishop, we don't recapture it. And now after the bishop moves back, we can take on f6 with a fork, and we're going to win a full rook in this one, not even just an exchange. White is completely crushing. But getting out of this isn't so simple. I mean, what other options does black even have? The engine gives the best line as castling the king here. But if you want to get totally crazy, this is a little bit unsound, but I guarantee that you're going to win pretty much every game you play with it. I mean, who hasn't had fun with the Stafford, and that's practically losing out of the opening. And the move that I'm suggesting to you guys, even though the engine calls it a bit dubious, is pawn to d4, given a question mark, but I'm going to make it an exclamation question mark. Because after the best suggested move, pawn takes on d4, we have bishop to g5, now going for our pin. If black captures the knight, then we capture on f6. And the way to retain the advantage here is pretty wild for black, and I don't think any of your opponents are going to find it. What they will probably find is the first move, and pretty natural one, which is pawn takes on b2, now counterattacking the rook in the corner, seeing as their queen is hanging. But after we move our rook to the side, both of their natural moves with the queen are actually losing the game on the spot. Queen to d7, for example, loses to queen to f4. And now queen to h6 and queen to g7 is pretty much an unstoppable threat. The only way to try and stop it is with knight to d8 going to e6. But we can play queen to h6 anyway, and after knight to e6 we have knight to f4. A lovely move looking to deflect the knight over here. After black tries to defend the knight, the fun doesn't stop. We play bishop takes on e6. Very important to play bishop takes on e6 and not knight takes on e6. You'll see that on the next move, because after the pawn captures, then we have knight takes on g6, double exclamation mark. If the pawn captures, we play queen to h8, king to f7, queen g7, checkmate. And if they play the natural move, queen to f7, looks like they're attacking two pieces. We have the absolutely disgusting back rank knight infiltration, knight to h8, attacking the queen, removing it from the f7 square. That is not a move you see every day. The queen now defends the bishop, so queen cannot take the bishop here, and after their queen moves to the side, we have a checkmate in 5. Try and find it yourself, but I'm going to give it to you. It's queen to g5, king goes to f8, knight to g6, returning to the square where the pawn can just capture it. If the pawn captures, queen to h6, king to g8, queen to h8, king to f7, queen g7 is checkmate. And if the king goes to f7, then we have knight to e5. If pawn takes on e5, queen g7. And if king goes to f8, we just take the queen, bishop takes, and queen g7 is mate all the same. So there are some really wild lines for you guys after bishop to g5. I'm going to show you the only way that the engine claims black retains an advantage, but even in the best line for black, I'm not sure many players would think they're doing better. The only way you can try and play this is with knight to e5. And after queen to f4, pawn takes on c3, bishop takes on f6, pawn takes on b2, rook to b1. Black has to avoid the temptation to save their queen, and instead goes for knight takes on c4. Allows us to take the queen, and after the rook takes back, the engine evaluates this position as equal. Although, to be honest, most of the time you'd probably rather have the extra queen. I imagine your opponent will think that too, and they'll most likely run into some of the wild lines that I just showed you. So that's pawn to g6 covered. The last move that I want to show you all is king to f8. This is probably the most tame of all of the positions. We can follow the same patterns as pawn to g6 and play queen to f3, make the checkmate threat. After they develop the knight, as always, we play knight to e2, stop their knight from coming in. They go d6, we go h3, same old business, stopping bishop to g4. And after bishop to e6, we can actually just take a pretty comfortable advantage. They've already moved their king to the side. Just trade the bishops, keep things simple, and while you're at it, grab the other bishop, knight to a4. You can take the dark squared bishop, as even if it retreats, bishop goes to b6, just capture that thing, castle your king, and enjoy the position. Congratulations, you have escaped the copycat and gained a nice advantage while you're at it. If you enjoyed the video, please do like and subscribe. We're getting very close to 1,000, so every subscription helps. I hope you can try this out in your own games, get some nice wins, put an end to those copycats, and as always, I'll see you in another video. Bye.